This lecture is titled Architecture and Design. Have you ever thought, what is architecture? What does it mean? And what is the difference between architecture and design? Developers often use these terms interchangeably. It's very important to feel the difference. So, let's start with architecture. Every serious software has an architecture. Even if the architecture is chaotic, it would mean that chaos is the architecture of that chaotic system. Software architecture is a very vague term which is very often treated as the highest level of abstraction of a system. What kind of data storage is present, how do modules interact with each other, what recovery systems are in place, and so on. Somewhere in 2013, there was a post by Martin Fowler who analyzed the problem of defining the notion of architecture. He quoted Ralph Johnson, who said that there is no such a notion as the highest level of abstraction of a system. Users, developers, product holders, they all look at the system from different angles and see the architecture differently. It's more correct to say that the architecture is comprised of significant components, and what makes a component significant is when expert developers say that particular components are significant. So, the role of the notion of the architecture is social. It is a formal and very often informal agreement on how to view the system from the highest level. There's also another bad definition of architecture, and it's important to talk about it. Here it is. Architecture is the decisions that you wish you could get right early in a project. Because of this definition, developers tend to think that choosing a particular DBMS, they make an architectural decision. In some cases it's true, and in other cases it's not. For example, if we isolate the DBMS by using interfaces at the corresponding boundary of our software system, and we can replace that DBMS, we make it irrelevant, and most likely we will not treat that DBMS as a significant component. Actually, DBMS and UI are tools. When we say that a particular DBMS or a particular UI technology belongs to the architecture, an analogy comes to mind that when we build a house, we treat hammers, jigsaws, and other tools as the architecture of a house. That would sound nonsensical. Of course, this is not an absolutely valid analogy, since hammers do not have such a significant influence on the end result as database management systems do. But we must understand that we should strive, if possible, to make tools irrelevant from the domain perspective. We should strive to defer architectural decisions as far as possible, since decisions made on the early stages very often in the end turn out to be not optimal at best. The definition of a software design doesn't warrant such deep observations. Software design is about designing the individual modules or components. What are the responsibilities, functions of module X? Of class Y? What can it do and what not? What design patterns can be used? Software design emphasizes on module, component, and class level. We also have such notions as architecture and design patterns. Architecture patterns are standard forms of relationships between components that deemed significant. Architecture patterns in general include two-tier client and server, basic client-server scenario, three-tier client-server and database, most often software-oriented architecture, the web service model, event-driven, and so on. Design patterns are those patterns we talked about throughout the course from time to time. They can be split into behavioral, structural, and creational patterns. I hope now you understand better what is architecture and design. Let's rant about searching for a balance a little bit in the next lecture.